thank you for coming, and it was a real pleasure creating the stories with you, the creative team, and we're here to share a bit of our insight and experiences while making our stories. So, Sophia, if you'd like to share your tips first.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Karen. So my first tip is to consider the balance between image and narrative. Keeping your visual material simple can add depth to your story and create just as much atmosphere as complex visuals. So my first tip comes from the, I guess, just reality that I'm not very techy. I don't have any, sort of serious recording equipment. I just have my iPhone. For the theme of my story, which was learning to play bass, I didn't have all kinds of photos or kind of archival material from my life about that topic. So it just made sense to make a very simple one image film. But even though that was that kind of reality grew out of my own background and my skills, it actually led to, I think, the right kind of visual material for the story I was trying to tell. And my second tip is your story doesn't have to focus on a big moment or life event. Taking a starting point in daily life and building a story from there can also be a way of telling others about the unique parts of your experience. So again, I decided to tell a story about something very sort of day-to-day, learning to play an instrument and how that connects to my spiritual practice. And yeah, I guess, we're living at home at the moment. We're not really going anywhere, but that doesn't mean that life can't be exciting. It depends where you put your attention and how you kind of think about your experience. So if you're struggling to think of a theme for a story, you might be able to find a narrative in something day-to-day, like cooking or another kind of practice that you have or a hobby. It doesn't have to be a big life event with huge consequences. It can also just be something that you do that makes you you and that you want to tell others about. So those are my tips.
Thank you, Sophia. Then I'll move on to Jane's.
So mine was to carefully consider how you can repurpose pre-existing material without distracting from the new story. So for one of my films, I used existing film material that I've made in the past as a filmmaker. For another one that I made, I used existing photographs. And I think that that's a way of making sure that you have copyright over it and that it's personal and interesting. But at the same time, then it's got to make sure that what you're showing on the screen isn't distracting from the verbal nature of what I'm saying. So some of those films in themselves, because they're so visual, they are a different story. And so if I start trying to contradict that story, it doesn't help the audience know which one to focus on. My second tip was to choose a priority between telling a story about creativity or employing creative storytelling techniques so that both can flourish. With this one, I wanted to say that for me, as a creative in the creative industries, I could just talk about my experiences of creativity, or I could show it visually on screen. And I think it's not that both of those can't exist in the same space, but knowing which one I am trying to achieve on screen makes it a lot easier to decide the narrative and be really clear in my intentions.
Thank you, Jane. And then it's on to my top tips. My first tip is to start from your experience and avoid telling us what you think, but tell us what you did that demonstrates your thinking. And this largely comes from my process when making the video, because I kept finding myself saying, no, creativity is this, creativity should be this. That wasn't really tied to anything to me personally. And I had to stop and think about, okay, what experiences did I actually encounter that made me think about these kind of philosophical facts. And that really helped me get a clear understanding of what I was doing. And similarly, I want to encourage you to think through making and don't worry too much about planning. The process will guide you when making a good video. And for this, it includes kind of feeling at times, and just knowing that some processes are going to be more hard in a way than planned, but that's only a good thing, and you should enjoy the whole process rather than just focusing on the end. And last but not least, it's up to Ben.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, so my first tip was play with perspectives, such as camera angles and time speeds, to add extra dimensions to your story. So if you, like, for example, for my piece, it was basically the footage was me and my dog Freya going for a walk. And I thought, well, I've got these different angles, interesting angles I can play with. So I could get above shots, I can get side shots, I can get a shot from the perspective of Freya the dog, from my perspective, and also different like landscape shots and like moving around as well. And I thought that it would just make it interesting and add different perspectives, as in different understanding of what's going on and how it can be interpreted in different ways by audience members, and also make it aesthetically interesting. And my second tip was explore accessible technology such as editing software. Certain apps have intuitive and accessible workflow, making it efficient and effective experience. So I used a number of apps, which sounds like it's more work than it's not, but it actually made my work more streamlined, because I used the GoPro app for the 360-degree footage, and then I used the drone app for the drone footage. So I could, and they're really good for those specific kinds of footage. So I could really play with them and then glue them together in another app like iMovie or WeVideo. And they've all got different pros and cons. So some have good music, some have good transitions. So just have an explore. They've all got really good learning how-to kind of guides as well.
Excellent. It's interesting for me that my top tips and Sophia's top tips are kind of interconnected, with starting with the self and telling a personal story, whereas Jane's and Ben's are closely related in terms of technology and using footage that is pre-existing.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting that how some contrast as well. So one of Sophia's is keep it simple, whereas I'm like, try all these different new things, and they're both valid in different ways. So Sophia's narrative needed that simplicity because it gave it breadth, whereas mine, I felt like it needed a bit more pace. So to change it up, gave it pace and judged it up a bit. Yeah, it's interesting.
I think one of the things that I loved about all of our films was we all play to our strengths, and I think that's what's come through with these tips. Like, I think, Ben, you had all this great technology to rely on. Karen had these amazing drawing skills. Sophia had these amazing writing skills. So like her visuals could sit back and let the writing kind of take focus. And I've obviously tried to bring in some of my film stuff to make that process easier and have a connection with that. But we all worked through, we found the thing that we could like ground our story in and then work from there. So I think all our tips is about making decisions of what works when you're creating.
Yeah, I guess, and for anyone watching these tips and kind of thinking about making a story, I guess that's our main point. Think about what it is you want to say and who you are, and try and convey that in a way that suits you and is fun and plays to your strengths. You don't necessarily have to warp yourself to be a good story maker. There's no one way that a good story is made. That you can tease out things from your own experience and your own skill set to make a really good video.